the Canadian Arctic with Charles Stankievech. He is a founding faculty member of the Yukon School of Visual Arts in Dawson City and professor and director of visual studies at the Daniels faculty. He's shown his work both in Canada and around the world at the National Gallery of Canada, the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, the Canadian Centre for Architecture, and the Venice Biennale. Tonight, his talk is about the history of weapons and metallurgy in the Arctic, starting with the Inuit and leading into the demand for rare earth elements in the 21st century. Charles, the floor is yours.
That's my clicker. All right, thanks everyone for coming out and the invitation. Thank you very much. In his science fiction short story from 1927, H.P. Lovecraft wrote, "It all began with a meteorite." Much earlier in 1569, cartographer Gerardus Mercator published the trademark flattened globe as a bounded rectangular mathematical projection. Accurately rendering space along a horizontal axis, the east-west vector privileging expedited colonial expeditions to the New World. But it's in the margins of this map, beyond the fantastical sea creatures and mythical gods peering over terra incognita, that we find ourselves peering into a mathematical system designed particularly for colonial resource extraction. Of course, it's missing an inset of the North Pole region. At the time, no one had ever been to this land beyond the land beyond. And so, by sheer description of space based on a sphere, it was necessitated that such a place did, though, exist. Aside from the grid revolutionizing navigation and trade, we still use this for shipping routes to Google Maps. Mercator's map also included the most advanced data visualization of the time, albeit a little erroneously. It had been passed down through the literature that celestial North Pole stood a magnetic mountain, an iron mountain. In the 16th century, empirical observation demonstrated that compasses all around the world always pointed north. But since the geological discipline itself had not yet developed to say that the entire planet as a molten core was a magnet, the guardians of knowledge mused that a massive magnetic mountain at the top of the world was generating all the attraction. And we see that here at the beginning of this map, at the middle. However, by the time Mercator was filling the colors of the grid in, he noticed a strange magnetic anomaly, one aggregating all the various data from the field recordings of sailors. And according to these counts, the compasses did not actually point directly north, and so the solution for such declination of the magnetic field, Mercator erroneously posited a second magnetic mountain, this time at 1 o'clock in the Bering Strait. Rendered in full color in 1595, the resulting map was the first cartographic document that was to ever slowly focus on the Arctic. And I like to joke that it's the first example of electromagnetic warfare in the Arctic. Eventually, the dual mountain theory melted away, but the metallic pole of the magnetic north has never completely subsided. And I start with this map for two reasons. The first is that it demonstrates that any of the dark spots in our mapping of the world, there exists a conflation always of fact and fiction, whether it be in science, in exploration, or any other unknown or uncharted territories that we dare to venture to. Second, by focusing the geographic region on the Canadian Arctic, one can trace an epic history of metallurgy, starting with the Inuit gleaning iron from meteorites, through the birth of cybernetics and the networked warfare in the Cold War, through into the speculative futures of the space race and the market of rare earth elements in the 21st century. Colonial extraction of natural resources is an ancient strategy. We could argue that it is such an industry, it is the engine at the dark heart of colonialism, extending across centuries and still very present today. Recent theories have suggested that the effect on the Earth is so immense it's literally changing the ground beneath our feet. Calling for a new geological index Scientists are labeling our new age the Anthropocene and saying it started with the colonial encounter of Europeans with the Americas, generating the largest population replacement in the past 13,000 years, the first truly global trade routes, and resulting in mixing of previously separate biological worlds, which we call the Columbian Exchange. It's difficult to determine where to pound the golden spike into the stratified layer of rock to demarcate a new epoch, like the one here. And so several speculative dates have been proposed, the earliest going way back to Prometheus' fire, and the latest marks the explosion of nuclear weapons. Others have suggested a larger phenomenon such as the invention of agriculture, or the Industrial Revolution, as the forces responsible for humanity's geological effect on the Earth. The connection between fire and industry and colonialism, however, is in my opinion the most convincing argument, transcending regionalism and leaving a long-term trace in the fossil record. German writer Sebald, in his novel The Rings of Saturn, wrote, "Combustion is the hidden principle behind every artifact we create. Like our bodies, like our desires, the machines we have devised are possessed of a heart which is slowly reduced to embers. From the earliest times, human civilization has been no more than a strange luminescence growing more intense by the hour, of which no one can say when it will begin to wane and when it will fade away." While fire is a perennial theme, new technologies demand specific raw materials, including what we're called rare earth elements. One rare earth element harkens back to an origin myth and is called promethium, which is used to create nuclear batteries and luminescent paints. Rare here is a relative term, as the elements are not rare within the actual crust of the Earth. It's more that there are 17 elements of the periodic table which are difficult to extract or smelt to find their unique elements separated. Furthermore, we call them unique because they are found almost exclusively in the high-tech industry today, and thus did not have a smelting process until very recently. Today, rare earth elements are an index of the global situation, articulating international trade, market trends, security policy, and geopolitical issues. While Canada might have a monopoly on the tar sands tailing ponds, it's China who dominates with 90% of the rare earth market, mostly in Mongolia. However, with a projected 40 to 50% of the world's rare earth deposits, Canada hopes to secure 20% of that market by 2018. Canada currently has 206 prospective projects, a backlash provided by China's tightening of the cost and exports of rare earth elements that increased our market share, but also a fear of the supply chain for security processes in Western countries. These two, of the two most advanced rare earth sites, they're actually both imaginatively called after spiritual lineages, though not local indigenous ones in Canada. Ashram is the first one at the northern region of Quebec, and Lake Thor is in the Northwest Territories. Lake Thor, being the most advanced project outside of China for heavy rare earth elements, will extract europium and terbium for glowing TVs, dysprosium for nuclear reactors and data storage, and neodymium for lasers and wind tunnels. And Thor is only one god among many, forging a correlation between metallurgy and spirituality. According to the historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, he conjectured that the origin of many religious rituals and worships were generated actually by meteorite impacts on the Earth. Easily the most spectacular event one could witness in ancient times, meteorites were by proxy holy objects from the heavens. In a time before mining, archaeometallurgists estimate that pure sources of iron alloy were extremely rare and valued more than gold, copper, or silver, elements found at the surface of the Earth and easily malleable at low temperatures. Gold was used for decoration, but it was the iron from the gods that was used for talismans and weapons. It has long been surmised that the black stone embedded in the eastern corner of the Kaaba in Mecca is a meteorite. And while Eliade wrote, Bedouins of the Sinai are convinced that man who is successful in making a sword of meteoric iron becomes invulnerable in battle. The Cape York meteorite supplied iron for the Inuit in Greenland before European contact. Chiseling flakes off the meteorite provided sharp metallic heads for spears like the one we just saw, or knives to cook with. In the turn of the 20th century, dubious polar adventurer and Rear Admiral Robert Peary convinced the Inuit to show him the meteorite, and he spent several years logistically extracting the rock and taking it to the Natural History Museum in New York for a bounty. In the official records of the discovery of the meteorite, Peary, as yet to advance on his North Pole mission, echoes the ancient mythology of the meteorites that we first heard long ago, that the meteorite was, to quote, an iron mountain. The Cape York aerolith, now in New York City, is the largest meteorite on display in the world. But back at the peninsula of Cape York in Greenland, there's a colonial outpost of the American Thule Air Force Base, which serves as the logistical hub for communications and a node for Arctic mobilization and surveillance. Thule, which I visited several years ago when embedded with the Department of Defense, was established as a permanent settlement for Robert Peary, and shortly thereafter given to the Greek name Ultima Thule, meaning beyond the borders of the known world, by the missionary Knud Rasmussen. In the 1950s, the Inuit people of the region and in several other locations in the Arctic were subject to government relocation, one of these several strategies used by the colonial occupying forces in the Arctic that either relocated Inuit people to annex certain strategic sites or force them into exile to occupy contested territory. It was during this time that Thule became a key station in the distant early warning line, or the DEW line, a logistical and technical tour de force of the American military-industrial complex. The DEW line was an electromagnetic curtain extended across the western ice cap, and is designed to alert mainland USA of incoming Soviet bombers carrying nuclear warheads, an operation still in existence today. The electronic infrastructure that connected these remote outposts, iconically remembered by Buckminster's Fuller's geodesic domes, which we've been seeing pass by, was the birth of cybernetics and early network design. While incredible resources backing the research and development as an emergency measure to protect against another Pearl Harbor, MIT, IBM, Western Electric, AT&T, and a host of other household names partnered with the Department of Defense to create the first semi-automatic air defense system. There was moreover the first example of networked real-time processing. In other words, what we would today call a computer. Called SAGE, the processing power and artificial nervous system reached all the way out to the farthest reaches of the Arctic via the DEW line, including to Thule. And in order to materially make the green radar screens glow and sonic alarms go ping, newly found uses for rare earth elements necessitated extraction, refinement, to roll out the components of the post-war assembly line. Specifically designed for the outposts of the Arctic, and thus foreshadowing the outer space missions to come, the infrastructure was for a skeleton crew, necessitating automated signal processing and supporting human sentinels who were watching out for bogies, signals traveling amongst the aurora borealis, like ghost riders from the future. Well, the DEW line military think tank in 1951 called for a continental early warning system. Science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke wrote about a galactic early warning system, positioned on the moon to sense for the emergence of intelligence on Earth. Eventually, the narrative was reworked by Kubrick to create a contemporary version of metallurgical mythology that was first found in the worship of meteorites earlier. 2001: A Space Odyssey was the first spiritual work for the rare earth age. And as such, 2001 is traditionally received as a utopian film where the monolith directs the evolution of consciousness from ape through Homo sapiens into beings of pure energy and light. We see here the monolith with the blue marble in the background just before the moments of its early warning signal. However, with its neutered, almost optimistic trajectory towards the star child, the Earth is left behind. We must ask, though, instead, what is behind the dream of the star child? Or as Jill Scott Heron sang in 1970, why is only Whitey on the moon? Contrary to our dogmatic modern belief in progress, one that Elon Musk propelled in the last TED Talk this last week in Vancouver, today we are stuck more on the Earth than when we were in 2001 was playing in cinemas. And since then, we've begun to see the end game of smelting more metal from machines. Historic terrestrial exploration causes many problems as it's solved, and I might highlight the solving was only for a few. Why would the future of celestial exploration be any different? Perhaps we're putting the cart before the horse, the booster before the capsule, as we burn up our spaceship Earth. As Marx warned when analyzing how capital and labor are interfaced, eventually workers themselves cast themselves merely as conscious linkages in an automatic system of machinery. Or to use more contemporary terms, consumers become the connective tissue of the network. The question is, do not androids dream of electric sheep, which was the original title of Blade Runner. It is rather, do rare earth elements dream of humans? Considering they are not part of the Elysium elite and do not have another planet to escape to, as if the one we have is as disposable as the planned obsolescence of our consumer technology powered by our rare earth elements, our understanding must shift from mining more rare earth to appreciating how rare our earth is. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. You know, as I was preparing for tonight, I was thinking about how much the broad area of design has come to be incredibly high profile and influential, sometimes in some kind of unexpected ways. Certainly in technology and cutting edge technology, it's deeply integrated into human-computer interaction, human-robot interaction, but often in surprising ways too. I mean, we commonly talk about design thinking when it comes to innovation. We've talked about applying design principles to designing your life, to designing your love life, to designing experiences. And I think what we're always reaching for when we try to do that is trying to capture that empathetic understanding, that innovation, and that open approach to problem solving that we find so well demonstrated here tonight.